Chapter 3. Strangers. Skadi woke up on the beach. Her clothes were soaked, but not from the tide. Her eyes were sore, and she could barely see. The tide had fallen away in the early morning, leaving her even more alone. Her body ached, and the sand burned against her skin. The soft light of early morning was blinding, singeing her entire form. She hoped it would burn her away, so that she couldn't feel this way anymore. She shook, not from cold or soreness, but from another type of pain, an agony that only comes from loss and betrayal. The realization that everything you know is false and there is no going back. Discontent rocked her soul until her heart started to slow. She wanted to die. Nothing mattered anymore. All she knew was pain, and she simply wanted it to end. She couldn't fight anymore. Her anger had dwindled. She lacked the strength to scream. She needed to get the pain out, but there was no way to expunge it from her system. She couldn't even cry. She lay motionless, like a corpse washed ashore. She wondered why she was allowed to wake, and if it was possible to sink back into unconsciousness. She pondered if it was even possible for a demigod to die, or if this was her eternal fate, perpetually stuck in between the pain of living and the unending servitude with the darkness inside. Her lips dried and cracked in the sun. Her face was tormented with tickles from her frayed hair. The wind blew against her backside, torturing her with the intense heat and cold that came and went sporadically. She hated everything. How could she enjoy anything? Was this another test or punishment? A dull sound slowly entered her ears. It got louder as it got closer. The soft crunch of sand being pressed down by footfall. Something was approaching. Perhaps it would kill her, if she was lucky. A soft voice calls. Are you alright? Skadi doesn't respond. For as much as both of them knew, she was simply a corpse. That's how she wanted it. To just be left alone or be put out of her misery. Skadi feels a slight touch against her shoulder, then an even stronger poke against her spine. This physical sensation was enough to help her remember how to breathe as she took a stifled sniffle. Someone was poking her with a stick. She couldn't remember a time she felt so undignified, except for her entire life being prodded and played with. Ow! Skadi exclaims. She stumbles onto her hands and knees. She felt her body come back to life. The numbness and sense of death she had worked so hard to accomplish was shattered with a swift kick in her rump. I'm sorry, he says softly, and she could tell he meant it. She could sense the concern and apologetic nature from his statement. Why did you kick me? Skadi asks with a gravelly tone. Her throat was corroded, possibly from screaming or lack of water, perhaps both. She hadn't remembered what happened last night after her father left. She felt so ashamed that she simply lay there on her hands and knees, unable to move. I wasn't sure if you were dead, he states blatantly, so I thought I'd check. By kicking me? Skadi hisses. It worked, he admits. Skadi blows her hair from her face, but it just swings back. Do you always sleep on the beach? She struggles to turn over, falling onto her butt as she raises a hand to scratch the hair out of her face before shielding her eyes from the sun. What's it to you? She croaks. He crouches down in front of her, casting his shadow over her. This is the second time I've found you out here, he says. Skadi groans, recognizing the young man. Are you homeless or something? Skadi thinks about it for a moment. Yeah, she says finally. I guess I am. I'm sorry, he offers. Why? She mutters. Everyone needs a place to stay, he explains. Somewhere to belong. He glances at her, but she continues to gaze off into nothingness. Aiden can be that place for you if you want. This caught her attention. She turned to him, blinking unconsciousness from her face. What? She burps. She quickly silences herself before speaking anymore. She could not handle any more shame or humiliation. Aiden, he says again, oblivious to her shame. That's where you are. She stares at him, and he just stares back. Ah, she says finally. Then she furrows her brow. Why are you always following me around? First of all, I don't, he states plainly. If anything, you find me more often than I stumble into you. She takes a step towards him, and he raises his hands defensively. I suppose we're just at the right place at the right time. Right, she scoffs. She stands tall to be intimidating, crossing her arms and staring at him. As if fate was really a thing. She blows some hair out of her face, and the wind knocks it right back. What would you call it? He asks. She glares at him again. Insubordination. I don't work for you. Neither am I trying to stop you. Sabotage. I'm not trying to ruin whatever you're trying to do here. Then what are you trying to do? He tosses his shoulders. Help, he says honestly, offering his palms. I guess. Help, Skadi mumbles. She had heard this same preposterous answer before. Unlikely, he shrugs. I'm serious. His voice was sincere, but Skadi had already turned deaf ears to him. It's not that hard to go out of your way a little to help someone in need. Okay. Skadi didn't really know what to say. She rubbed her face with sand-covered hands. As she began to wake, so too did all of the pain. Aches racked her body, and she could feel herself slipping again. She didn't know who this person was, nor did she care, but she didn't want to fall apart in front of him. She could feel him move away as the sun burned her skin again, only for her to feel him plant himself down beside her. She glared across to him, like a beast from behind the cave of her hands and the vines of her hair. You want some water? He asks. He wasn't even looking at her, fiddling at his waist before bringing up the flask to her cold facade. It took her a moment, but she dropped her guard, allowing her shaky fingers to cradle the bottle and fumble with the lid. She drank from the mouth of the container, nursing the nourishing liquid that poured into her body. She could feel herself becoming revived, more than just the refreshing nature, but the natural healing it brought from her magical connection. She drank until she could feel resistance from the suction of the container, coughing as she released only to continue drinking. The entire time, he simply sat in silence, waiting for her to finish. She swallowed every last drop. It wasn't until she craned her neck back until she felt her spine hurt did she realize what she had done. She opens her eyes to look at the empty container. She glances at him, handing the flask back to him. She struggled to say anything, an apology or thanks, but his deadpan expression stopped her. He simply took back the bottle without a word or expression, as if he hadn't done this out of compassion. He was neither surprised nor angry with her in any way. It was almost as if, "This doesn't mean anything to you," Skadi whispers. He glances at her, eyebrows slightly raised. "What?" he asks. He genuinely seemed like he hadn't heard her. "Why did you help me?" she asks. "Why do you care?" His brow furrows, puzzled by this. "Why not?" he responds. He leans back, planting his arms in the sand behind him to prop himself up. "I can't offer you anything," she says softly. Skadi's eyes stared daggers into the sand, trying to make sense of this. She softened her gaze to look at him, all the while he was simply looking at her. "I didn't ask for anything." "Then why help people?" This seemed to get a response from him. He sits up, looking intently into her eyes. "You don't help people because you get anything out of it," he states firmly. "You do it because it's the right thing to do." Their eyes locked for a long time. "If someone is able to, of course." Skadi shook her head and turned away. She didn't understand. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Skadi mumbles. "I don't?" "No," Skadi exclaims. He stumbles back from her sudden outburst. "You have no idea what it means to be forced to serve others. It's a burden to be indebted into something from birth and never rid of it." She glares at him as he slowly gathers himself. Only when she turned away did she soften her grimace, suddenly wondering if she had pushed away another person. "You're right," he says slowly. "I don't understand what that's like." They both say nothing for a moment. Only the sound of the waves washing against the shore can be heard. "But I don't think it has to be a burden." She turns her bloodthirsty gaze back towards him. "What do you mean?" she asks with venom. He shrugs and hugs his knees, ignoring her poisonous look. I think it would be an honor to serve people, he says finally before shifting to stand up. I'm not just talking about a good deed is its own reward. That basically means that doing the right thing should be expected, and your reward is knowing you're a good person. He turns and walks through the shafts of sunlight as dust floats through the air. I'm talking about actually helping people, making them happy. There's nothing better than seeing a smile on someone's face and knowing that you put it there. She stares at him. Everything he said was a mystery. Every ounce of aspiration he had inspired her in a way that seemed almost childish. She wasn't sure if she felt proud or pity for him. His experience was lacking, and she wondered if he was truly a fool or if there was some hidden brilliance in what he said. There are a lot of people out there that don't have it very well. I know for one because I grew up with very little. I don't want people to suffer through what I did. That's why I make it my goal to try and help as many people as I can. Not because it makes me a good person, or because I hope I'll get some sort of reward. He stops and turns, smiling genuinely. He shrugs, want to help. Skadi could not make sense of this. She wanted to feel frustrated, angry, but something else gripped her soul. There was a dark feeling in her gut, a sense of loneliness that shoved away her malice. She wanted to hate him, to lash out in rage, but she couldn't. It was like there was some unknown understanding that she had that wouldn't allow her to force the blame of her emotions onto this boy. This foolish child that knew nothing about the world, and yet seemed to have a better understanding than her. This confusion racked her head, causing a nauseating headache. They sat there together in silence as the sun rose. Skadi pondered for a long time, trying to make sense of things. Meanwhile, the world continued to move around her, the tide slowly starting to make its advance and retreat, gaining ground with every attack until the water licked at her toes. Are you cold? He asked quietly. She glances at him. It looks like you lost your shoes. He nods towards her feet. She glances down at her legs. I don't have shoes, she says softly. Oh, right, he whispers apologetically. Homeless. He turns away from her, as if that was that. But Skadi turns to him in kind. Why are you talking to me? She asks. He glances at her. Is that a crime? He asks. His humor was lost on her. She wraps her arms around her knees, pulling her feet in from the rising tide. You don't know me. That's how you get to know people, though. Skadi turns to give him the most disgusted face. He looks surprised by how appalled she was by his statement. The water rushes up again, and he retreats, standing to his feet beside her, but refusing to simply leave her. I know I'm just a stranger, he starts, but sometimes those are the best people to talk to. He pauses, as if waiting for her to scold him again. When he receives no response, he continues. Strangers are people whose opinions don't matter. You can tell them anything, talk about all sorts of stuff, and it doesn't really matter. She begins to slowly turn towards him. They're not going to have any bias because they don't know anything about you, and you're not going to see them again. She stares at him, deeply, intently, as if attempting the same gaze he gave her, trying to pierce into him and learn his true intentions. He chews his lip a moment before smiling again. And if you ever do see each other again, you're no longer strangers. She thought for a moment. She struggled to understand this person, his genuine nature and honest intentions. How much are you willing to hear? She asks. His smile melts into a serious slash across his face. Tell me everything.